Today I'm going to be painting a scene study from the animated film Klaus. I picked Klaus because everything about this animation was beautiful. I felt like there was something to learn from every frame, but what drew me in particular was the lighting, and that's going to be my main focus for this study. I will be using this reference here today, and it's also in the description box if you want to repaint it as well. I'm using my Strathmore mixed media sketchbook to do some studies of my study before I get into the actual painting, and I'm starting off by mixing a few colors that I see in the reference just as a warm-up so I have a general idea of what I'm working with. My strategy when I mix colors is that I don't really have a strategy. I always start by finding whatever old color I have left on my palette that's closest to the color I need, and then I will re-wet it, add paint, and tweak it from there. That's one of the main reasons why I prefer traditional gouache over acrylic gouache. Then I sketched a quick little thumbnail to make sure I was able to get my colors to work together. I love the warm glow in the scene, so I wanted to make sure I captured that. I'm speeding things up in the video here since this stage was not too important, and I will also be skipping parts of the painting process as I talk. But I did film the entire process of this painting, so I will also have a very long, relaxing, real-time paint with me kind of video of the scene study very soon once I'm done editing. Onto the actual painting, my plan was to tackle the biggest shapes first, and then slowly build up the details from there. This way, I don't have to be super precise about the edges of my brush strokes because my edges will get covered and refined as I move towards the foreground. Looking more closely at the reference this time, and not just at the big general shapes, I'm noticing that there are a few different hues to the white in the snow. There is a lot of complexity and texture going on in the original reference, but ultimately I know that it's going to look warmer in the areas where the sun reaches and cooler in the areas where the snow is in shadow and completely hidden from the sun. So ignoring the orange and yellow highlights for now, I simplified everything into two groups, a more purpley gray for the warmer areas and a bluer gray for the cooler areas. The next thing I noticed is that even though there are a lot of colors being reflected in the snow, the value of the snow is actually pretty even and consistent, and I can see that even more clearly when my image is in grayscale. To make sure that the values of my grays are consistent, I test my colors on a scrap piece of paper. Sometimes it's easy to tell right away when one color is obviously lighter than another in value, like pure yellow and pure blue for example. But when the colors are very similar like this, it's hard to tell unless you're very experienced. So one trick I like to use in this situation is I'll take a quick picture of the colors on my test paper and then turn the photo to black and white. Then I can see immediately that the gray on the right is ever so slightly darker than the one on the left, which in this case would make my warmer gray look like it's a shadow of the cooler gray. So for the first layer of snow, I went with my purpley gray near the middle where the sun is shining and the bluer gray on the sides where the sunlight is blocked. Next, I continue laying down the biggest blocks of color that I see in my reference, which in this case is the row of houses, the bridge, and more of the background. Meanwhile, this gives my snow enough time to dry so I can go in with my next layer of color. mixed a slightly darker version of my warm gray and used it as a shadow to define the form of the snow. Once the form is more or less established, I went in with my orange and yellow highlights to give it that sunlit glow. Once I was happy with the snow and I've reached that point where I know I will very likely ruin it if I keep working on it, I added in the rest of the foreground. This is one of the most satisfying parts in my opinion because I get to cover up all the rough edges that I left behind from the background. And once all the white spaces in the foreground are filled, the entire area just comes together and it immediately looks more refined. One thing I love about the original scene that I didn't capture was texture, since that wasn't my main focus for this study. But I do want to play with textures soon, so maybe I will do that in my next scene study. Here, I'm using short pieces of masking tape as a ruler because the high contrast of the dark wood against the light snow will draw a viewer's attention to it, so any shakiness in my lines will be very apparent. At first, I was using the masking tape as you normally would, painting against it or onto it, but after a few peels, I noticed that the edge of the masking tape started to lose its sharp edge, and it was giving me a bit of a fuzzy line. So later, I ended up using the tape as more of just a guide, meaning that I'd stick the tape just a few millimeters away from where I want my line to be, and then just freehanded it. I would say that freehanding gave me the sharpest lines, but it gets riskier the longer the line is. As I filled in the details of the houses, I realized that my orange house was looking a little too bright next to the other houses. Especially in contrast to the highlights on the roof, the house just didn't look like it was in shadow, so I darkened and desaturated the orange a bit, and it was definitely better. Then I realized that I smeared the orange from my house onto the snow, and while I was trying to color match the exact shade of gray to fix it, I also managed to get white paint at the edge of my paper. Luckily, the magical thing about gouache is that you can cover up mistakes so we can pretend it never happened. We're getting near the end here, and while I was really nervous about messing up the little characters, I actually think they turned out okay. All that's left now are a few finishing touches here and there, and the study is complete. This is the first scene study I've ever done, and I had so much fun painting it. I really feel like I gained a better understanding of the color relationships in this one scene after spending so much time analyzing every detail to recreate it. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I'm already working on editing the full painting process of the scene study, so if you're interested in that, please keep an eye out for it. Meanwhile, feel free to watch my last gouache painting video from last week. And again, thank you so much for watching.